Hey everybody, what is going on? So in this section, we're going to talk all about how you can build rapport. Now, to get things started, the first thing you got to think about when it comes to any sales meeting, no matter what your product or service is, and no matter what industry you're in, you got to get the other person to trust you, because if the other person doesn't trust you and if they don't like you, then your chances of getting them to buy whatever it is that you're selling is very slim. Now, the best way that I found to get people to trust you is this concept called building rapport. And all rapport really is, it's basically a close, harmonious relationship in which the people or the groups concerned understand each other's feelings or ideas and communicate well. And I know that's a long definition and that's the standard definition, but to put it more simply, building rapport is just getting another person to like you. And it's that simple, because if you can't get other people to like you, usually based on the first impression, they most likely will have either a neutral or negative opinion on you, especially if they think you're a salesperson. And then from there, they're not going to be buying anything from you because they don't trust you, right? But if you're able to break down these barriers and get people to trust you and they let you in the door, then it's going to be so much more easier to convince them to take an action, and that is to help them make a buying decision. Now, here's the thing when it comes to building rapport. You're basically making the other person subconsciously think of you. And the key word here is subconsciously, right? They may not be aware of it, but their subconscious mind is thinking and feeling, I like this person, I feel comfortable around them, I feel seen, I feel heard, and I feel like what I say matters, right? If you make another person feel these emotions, it's very, very likely that they are just going to naturally gravitate towards you, and they're going to trust you, they're going to like you, and when it's time for them to make a buying decision, they trust you. And that if you really believe that your product or service is going to deliver the value that you're promising them, and they trust you in that way, selling is going to be incredibly easy. But to actually make this happen, meaning to actually build rapport with somebody and get them to like you the moment you shake their hand or the moment you guys see each other and speak, that is actually a little bit more technical. But don't worry, we're going to dive into all of these strategies right here. Now, before we even dive into those strategies, I want to first say that the most common mistake most people make when it comes to selling is that they're focusing too much on the sales tactics, right? When you focus too much on the technical details on what to do and what to say, you're not really focused on building a human connection, and you're not focused on appealing to emotional first. And a lot of salespeople, they have this concept or this idea that they just have to stack all the benefits of why someone should buy and that person should buy. In reality, people don't buy in that way. And when you try to force someone to buy your thing and try to stack all these details like, oh, it goes, if you're selling a car, it goes this fast, you're going to get X amount of mileage and blah, blah, blah. And like, yeah, these things are somewhat important. However, people aren't going to really make their buying decisions based on logic. And for example, let's say you are at a used car dealership and a salesperson comes up to you and just says, hey, you want to buy a car? Check out this car, check out that car, check out this car. And obviously you're going to be turned off. You're not going to want to buy anything from this person because you feel like they're being inauthentic, they're being fake, and they're just trying to get you to buy something so that they can make more money, right? It's not just limited to used car salesmen. It's these type of characters do exist almost in every industry. It's up to you as a seller to break away from this mold and really come in with the perspective where you're trying to change another person's behavior towards salespeople. Because typically salespeople do have a negative connotation attached to their names because of a few bad apples. However, you want to be that person that's different, where you're not trying to sell something. You're adding value to someone's life and helping them make a buying decision. Totally flipped. And you want to think of it like, let's say the iPhone, right? An iPhone is a really good example of people buying emotionally, because every year a new iPhone comes out and there are people lining up to buy this iPhone. Now, do they absolutely need the new iPhone that comes out? No, especially if they just bought one a year before. But because Apple does such a good job in making people feel like they want to buy, people will buy it on their own will, and then they'll justify it logically, and they'll say, oh, I want this new iPhone because it has face recognition and it's bezel-less and has a better camera and all these things, right? In reality, it doesn't matter. The magic Apple is able to create is that people want to buy these things emotionally and they'll justify it logically. And in fact, if you walk into any Apple store, something that you may not know is that the salespeople who are selling the iPhones or selling MacBooks and things like that, they actually don't earn any commission off of their sales, right? And sales is usually a commission-based job. The reason for that is Apple believes that the products really just sell themselves and the salespeople are there just to answer questions. The moral of the story is that people buy emotionally and they justify logically, right? You always want to keep this in mind no matter what you're selling. Even if you think your product is something that is just all numbers based, it's all about the return on investment. That's not necessarily always true because there is always an emotional aspect to human beings and how we make our decisions. Here are going to be some general rules when it comes to building rapport, right? Very simple. You got to feel good about yourself because people can feel it when you are more confident and comfortable in your own skin. Number two, you got to make the other person feel comfortable being around you. And when both sides, you and the other person, feel comfortable, then there is this connection that's built and it's so much more easier to fluidly communicate with one another. Now, as we dive a little more deeper into building rapport, you got to focus on emotions, and the tactics and what to say and all those things are going to come naturally. Both are important, but if you do not get them down emotionally, meaning you're not getting the other person to like you as a person and to trust you, the tactics don't really matter because they're not really going to listen to anything you have to say. So remember, focus on emotion because people buy emotionally and they're going to justify that purchase logically. So like we mentioned before, the goal of building rapport is to get the other person to like you and trust you. You might be asking, what is the secret to get people to like you? Well, this is where we're going to dive into the elements of communication. Now, most people make the mistake of focusing too much on persuasion tactics and they want to be fed these lines, right? What do I say if this person says this? Or how do I do this objection and blah, 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 right? And reality is, although those things will come in handy later on in the course, you gotta focus on the emotions because it's not so much about what you say, it's about how you say it. And let me explain exactly what I mean. So there have been a number of studies done, and what people have found is that based on the first impression that you make the moment you meet somebody, 55% on whether or not someone is going to like you is determined by your body language, your style, how you look, how you dress, how you smile, all those things. That is what people are going to pay most attention to. The second most important thing that determines whether or not someone's going to like you and trust you based on first impression is your tonality, meaning how you sound when you speak. You know, how does your voice sound? Is it high? Is it low? How fast you're speaking? Elements like that. And finally, the smallest element when it comes to communication is actually the words that you say, meaning, you know, what's actually coming out of your mouth, what are the questions you're asking and things like that. But you'll find here that 93% of whether or not someone's going to like you based on the first impression is nothing to do with what you're saying. It's about how you look, your style, and the way you're saying it and how you sound. So you can just see someone and meet with them for the first time. You say, hey, how's it going? My name's Patrick. And from there, you know, you can really determine whether or not this person is going to like you. But if you come off really shady or you're shifting your eyes and things like that, people are not going to trust you. And even though you may be a trustworthy person, people are not going to feel that because this is how human beings take in information and that's how we're wired. And if you really want to break down how these elements of communication works, we got this graph over here. And essentially, right, every human being, you know, they are in some kind of environment and we're going to call that the world. And they're going to take in information, and there's 5 ways: sight, smell, hearing, taste, and touch, right? And so our subconscious brain is going to take in all this information, filter it all down, and then we're going to make a decision on another person. And we're going to decide whether or not we're attracted to them, whether or not we like them, whether or not we believe they can bring value into our lives. So if you're not looking on point or you're very different in the negative way, people are not going to trust you because even if your intent is good, our brains are not able to see what your intent is so quickly, and we have to use these superficial things to take in information and make sense of it in our heads. So that's why your style and how you sound and how you look absolutely do matter when it comes to a first impression. However, obviously later on, what you say and your substance and who you are will matter, but if you can't get your foot in the door and getting someone to trust you in the beginning, it's pretty much over from there. All right, so to make sure you understand the elements of communication, it's going to be 55% 20% body language, 38% tonality, and it's only gonna be 7% the words that you're actually saying. So again, it's not what you're saying, it's how you're saying it. Okay, so to give you an example of how body language, right, your physical appearance and how you sound affect so much in how people perceive your message, let's just go through some examples. So when you're performing bad body language, your back is a little hunched over, your eyes are shifty, you're looking down when you speak, you're not confident, right? Let's give you an example of what that looks like. So let's say I'm trying to sell a customer and I say, hey, yeah, you'll probably get a return on your investment. And yeah, a lot of our customers, they do pretty well, right? So if I say something like that, you're gonna think, is this guy legit? Is he lying to me? You're really not sure because this person is so not confident in who they are and what they're saying. Now, if you kind of reverse the situation, let's say your back is straight, you're looking directly at the person in the eyes, not that you should be staring them down, but looking at them confidently, and your tonality is confident and sounding good. So let's go ahead and give you an example. So if I say, hey, Sally, I'm very confident you're going to get the return on investment that you're looking for. In fact, a lot of the companies that we worked with get us 300% in ROI. So I'm not promising necessarily you're going to get that result. However, it's very likely that it's going to happen. So if I said something like that, obviously I'm a lot more confident in what I'm saying, and what I'm saying is also a lot more believable versus if I was talking like this, right? So you have to really pay attention to body language and tonality. So when you're talking to somebody in person, remember, physical body language, how you look, how you dress, what your style is, that will influence whether or not someone is going to like you on the first impression. And first impressions matter because if you can't get someone to like you, they just won't buy anything from you. But reversely, if you're able to control how people perceive you based on your style, how you look, and how you sound, you're just gonna have that much more of a competitive edge in getting this person to trust you and then closing the deal. And when you're talking to somebody over the phone, obviously they're not gonna be able to see you, but know that your physical body language will influence how you sound. So if you're hunched over, talking like this, people are gonna hear it, right? But if you sit more confidently and you just speak normally, then people are going to feel your positivity and they're gonna feel your confidence and they're gonna have more confidence in you. Now, when it comes to tonality, diving a little bit deeper, it's gonna be broken down into 3 main elements. So that's gonna be pitch, pace, and volume. Now, when it comes to pitch, that's gonna be how low or how high you are speaking. So if you're talking like this, people may not take you seriously, right? But if you're talking too low, that may also be a turnoff for some people. So you want to make sure that you're matching the pitch of the other person, speaking much more normally and what's more acceptable. Now, that doesn't mean you have to give up your individuality. Sometimes your pitch may just be a little higher because you were born that way, and that's totally fine. However, you just got to pay attention to make sure that your pitch is just in the right place where people aren't turned off by it. Now, when it comes to pace, this is something you 100% can control, which is how fast you're speaking and how slow you're speaking. So if you're talking like this and I'm talking like this and nobody understands what I'm saying, then no one is literally going to understand what I'm saying. But if you're talking too slow, then people aren't going to take you seriously. They might think you're not intelligent. So that's why you want to make sure you're talking at the right pace. And my recommendation is just to match whatever pace the other person is speaking at. So if they're speaking really fast, you want to speak a little more fast. But if they're more slow and reserved, then you want to speak that way as well. Now, the last part is volume, right? How loud you're speaking or how softly you're speaking. So again, you want to make sure that your volume is not too high and not too low, and it matches the other person, because people like other people who are similar to them. So if you have a normal like pitch, tonality, and volume and all these things, and it closely matches to how the other person is speaking, they're that much more likely to like you as a person. And they're gonna make these judgments within the first 5 seconds of meeting you. And that's why you just wanna get this in your subconscious and match their pitch, tonality, volume, pace, and all those things. And let's go ahead and dive into the words. Now, words, they don't necessarily matter based on a first impression. However, after you get past the first impression, you have to have substance. So from there, the words will actually matter in the long run. But in the first 5 seconds, the words don't actually matter. You could just say, hey, how's it going, John? And you can get the other person to like you. However, as you get to know the prospect a lot more, you can't just rely on body language and tonality. Your words actually have to make sense, because now it's all about substance. But in the beginning, pay attention to your physical body language and your tonality, and then pay attention to the words later on. Now let's go ahead and go over some building rapport examples, right? So if I'm going to say to somebody, hey, how's it going? And the prospect says, hey, it's going good. That's an example of rapport where it's very natural. Both sides communicate and there's a connection built. But if I talk a little more uncertain, like, hey, how's it going? If I say something like that and I'm the salesperson, the other person is not going to be confident in making a purchasing decision from me. In these examples, it's all tonality, right? So I could say something like, especially if it's over the phone, I could say, hey, John, it's really great to talk to you here today. How are you doing? John says, it's great to meet you too. I'm doing great, right? But if I say it in a way that's a little more negative, like, hey, John, it's really great to talk to you today. How are you doing? If I say it like that, obviously the other person is going to think like, why is this guy not confident? Is he timid? Is he doing something shady and I don't know about it? Am I wasting my time? All these questions will pop into John's head because he's just not sure on whether or not he can trust me. So that's why when you speak, especially when it comes to over the phone, tonality is super important. You got to speak with confidence and you got to make the other person feel comfortable. When to dive a little more deeper about rapport, right? A lot of times people will teach that to build rapport means you got to have something in common with the other person, meaning you might talk about sports, weather, or something like that, right? And it is somewhat true where people like other people who are just like them. However, if you have nothing in common with another person and they're just not giving you any information, that's totally fine too, because when you're building rapport, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have something in common like a sport or some kind of activity. You can just actually use your body language and tonality just to get them to like you, and then from there you can actually just transition into starting the sales meeting. So you do not have to have anything in common on a personal level with another person to build rapport, and I've done this many times. You just really have to get your tonality and style down and just go into the meeting. And so let's go ahead and give you an example of that. Hey Sally, great talking to you here. How are you doing today? And let's say this is an example where I'm talking over Sally, first time over the phone, and Sally says, I'm doing great, how about you? And I'll say, I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. If you're ready, we can dive right into the call if you want. And Sally will say, sure, sounds good. And you just dive into it right there. I didn't have to talk about sports. I didn't have to talk about yoga. I didn't have to talk about anything except business. And that's totally fine. Just make sure your style, tonality, and physical appearance, depending on whether you're talking to them over the phone or in an in-person meeting, are all on point. So again, contrary to popular belief, small talk does help. However, it's not completely necessary to get someone to like you. And I've done this with many different people of all different ages and all different ethnicities and things like that. It works. And I also have done this as I traveled around the world talking to people who barely speak any English. And you don't need to have anything in common with the other person except be curious about who they are and make sure that your tonality and your physical appearance are on point, and they're gonna like you. You don't have to have anything in common, like really. Now, when you start a meeting, right, obviously you have to transition into the sales meeting. I already gave you one example, but I want to give you some other examples so you get some inspiration on how you can do it in your own style. So let's say you're meeting someone first time, say, hey Sally, how's it going? Sally says, I'm doing great. And then you could say something like, if you're ready, we can dive right into the call if you want. That's one example. Another is, do you mind if we go ahead and get started? And they'll say, yeah, I don't mind. Let's go ahead. Another example is, I want to be mindful of your time. So how about we go ahead and get started? So these are all simple ways you can just transition into the meeting. Sometimes you may not know like whether or not you should be talking about small talk or business, or maybe you gotta get the person to like you first. And the reality is, if you just use these simple transition words, it's a very polite way and a very assertive way actually to just get the job done. And the other person is going to appreciate it because they feel that you know what you're doing and you're not wasting their time. So with that said, that's everything that we have to cover when it comes to rapport. The main thing that I want to summarize for you is that people are going to buy emotionally and they're going to justify it logically, and you do not need small talk to build a connection with another person. It's all about your style, physical appearance, and tonality, and then later on, your substance will matter once you get the person to like you. So again, that's everything that we have to cover on building rapport, and I'm going to see you guys in the next section.